It was 2:37 in the morning when my phone illuminated the dark room, a single message from my mother, Linda. I tapped it open, expecting crisis. Instead, I saw a photograph. It was my childhood bedroom, but it looked like devastation. My books, my certificates, my belongings, everything was crammed into black trash bags. Underneath, a caption read, "We need this space for Ashley's new art studio. Collect your stuff by noon or it's going to donation." 4 seconds later, another notification appeared. My sister, Ashley, had liked the message. Before we discover how Jessica responds to this absolute betrayal, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My reaction wasn't tears. It was a complete cognitive freeze. I just stared at the screen until it went dark. For 32 years, I had been the invisible foundation of this family. My parents, Martin and Linda, lived in a world where image was the only currency that mattered. To the neighbors in Portland, they were established professionals, country club members with a Lexus in the driveway, and a daughter, Ashley, who was a rising influencer in lifestyle branding. To me, they were a financial catastrophe. They didn't know that I knew about the collection notices 6 years ago. They didn't know that I was the one who logged into my father's accounts every month to pay off the $18,000 in credit card debt he accumulated trying to maintain appearances. I was a supply chain analyst. My entire career was built on optimizing systems, identifying inefficiencies, and preventing systemic collapse. And for 12 years, my family was the biggest inefficiency I had to manage. I remember the first time I paid a bill for them. I was 24, recently graduated with a degree I financed myself. My mother called me crying about a declined card at a department store. It wasn't necessities she was buying, it was designer handbags for Ashley's birthday photo shoot. I paid it. I told myself it was temporary. But then it became the mortgage payment, then the car payment, then Ashley's apartment in the city because she couldn't focus on her brand if she was stressed about finances. Why did I do it? Why did I pour nearly 60% of my salary into a void while I drove a 12-year-old Honda and shopped at outlet stores? For a long time, I told myself it was family obligation. But tonight, staring at the image of my life stuffed into garbage bags to make room for my sister's vanity project, I finally admitted the truth. It wasn't obligation, it was rent. When you grow up as the backup in a system designed to elevate someone else, you start to believe that your existence is a liability. You believe that you occupy space you haven't earned, so you pay. You pay in silence, you pay in cash, and you pay in self-worth, hoping that if the payment is large enough, they might finally acknowledge you exist. I had normalized their cruelty so thoroughly that I thought it was just the cost of belonging. I thought if I kept the system running, they wouldn't notice I was the one powering it. But the rent had just increased. They didn't just want my money anymore, they wanted my erasure. They wanted to replace the physical evidence of my childhood with a vanity project for the favored child. It was a crystal clear message. We don't need you, we just need what you provide. I stood up and walked to my desk. I didn't drive to their house to plead for my belongings. I didn't call to argue. I sat down at my computer and opened a spreadsheet I hadn't examined in years. It was titled Family Financial Support. I had documented every dollar, every bailout, every transfer. I scrolled to the bottom. The number staring back at me wasn't just a figure, it was evidence of my own delusion. $287,000. That was the price I'd paid for admission to a family that just revoked my membership. I closed the laptop. The sadness I expected didn't materialize. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. They wanted me gone. Fine, but they had forgotten one crucial principle of systems analysis. If you remove the critical node, the entire network collapses. 9 days went by without a word about my belongings. I assumed they were sitting in a donation center somewhere or maybe decomposing in a landfill. I didn't ask, I didn't return to check. I just went to work, optimized my supply chains, and waited. I knew the silence wouldn't last because silence doesn't pay the bills. On Wednesday, the summons arrived. It wasn't a request, it was a calendar notification sent by my mother. Ashley's creative director celebration, 7 p.m., the Onyx Lounge. No note, no hope you can attend, just a demand for my presence as a prop in their family performance. I showed up because I needed to witness it. I needed to see the machine operating one final time before I deconstructed it. The venue was exactly their aesthetic. Too much glass, too many LED lights, and food that looked expensive but tasted like nothing. Ashley was holding court in the center of the space, wearing a silk jumpsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was beaming, telling everyone how she manifested this creative director position at a premium lifestyle brand. But tonight, she was the visionary and I was just the background. My father, Martin, tapped a knife against a champagne flute. The room quieted. He looked the part of the proud patriarch, tanned and smiling, wearing a suit I had paid for 3 years ago. "To my daughter, Ashley," he announced, his voice thick with manufactured pride. "She is the brilliance of this family, the vision, the one who proves that talent is hereditary." The room applauded. Then his eyes slid over to me, and his smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. "And to Jessica, our steady foundation, always there, always reliable. While Ashley reaches for excellence, Jessica keeps things functional. We need people like that, don't we?" A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. It was a masterclass in dismissal. He hadn't just insulted me, he had publicly defined my value as subordinate to hers. I was the infrastructure, she was the showcase. I set my glass down. I was about to leave when my father intercepted me near the service corridor. The smile was gone now. He looked anxious, frantic. "There's a problem with the payment," he whispered, leaning in close so the guests wouldn't observe. "The catering company is being difficult. They need the final payment immediately or they're going to terminate the open bar." "So pay them," I said, my voice emotionless. "I can't right now. There's a freeze on my account. A bank processing issue." He waved his hand dismissively, the universal gesture of a liar. "And Ashley's card is maxed from the outfit. Just handle it, Jessica. I'll transfer you the money on Thursday." Handle it? That was my entire existence in 2 words. Handle the mortgage, handle the credit card debt, handle the fact that we are frauds living a luxury life on borrowed money. "How much is it?" I asked. $5,200. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown my childhood memories into garbage bags 10 days ago to make room for art supplies. He didn't look ashamed. He looked entitled. He expected this. In his mind, this was the natural order. I pay, they perform. "Okay," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't demand a promise of repayment. I walked to the management desk, extracted my credit card, and paid the invoice. When the receipt printed, I didn't discard it. I laid it flat on the counter. I took my phone out and photographed it in high resolution. Then I emailed it to myself. "Everything satisfactory, ma'am?" the manager asked. "Perfect," I said, "just maintaining documentation." I walked back out to the celebration. My father gave me a nod, not gratitude, just confirmation that the system was functioning correctly. I looked at Ashley, laughing with her followers, completely oblivious that her big night was being subsidized by the sister she had deleted. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the side exit into the cool night air. That $5,200 wasn't a gift. It was the final acquisition price of my freedom. They thought I was the foundation that kept them stable. They were about to discover what happens when the foundation initiates seismic activity. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I went to battle. But my battlefield wasn't a confrontation in the living room. It was a spreadsheet on my triple monitor setup at home. I brewed a pot of black coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and stopped being Jessica, the invisible daughter. I became Jessica, the forensic analyst. I pulled bank records going back 12 years. I accessed the shared cloud drive my father had carelessly given me the password to years ago so I could troubleshoot his email. He never changed it. I downloaded everything: tax returns, credit statements, mortgage documents. I laid it all out, transaction by transaction, dissecting the anatomy of their financial exploitation. It was disturbingly fascinating. I saw the $25,000 business investment I gave them 5 years ago listed in their personal notes as Jessica's contribution. I tracked where it went. It didn't go to Dad's consulting practice. It went to a luxury European river cruise, a trip they told me they had won in a company raffle. I saw the tuition payments for Ashley. I saw the lease payments for a Range Rover I wasn't allowed to drive. I saw the $600 dinners on nights when I was eating leftover ramen to save money for car repairs. They had been draining me not to survive, but to perform. They were burning my future to keep their vanity warm. The final total sat at the bottom of the screen, glowing in red: $287,000. That was the cost of their acceptance. That was the price tag on my invisibility. But I wasn't finished. I dug deeper into public records. I needed to understand the asset situation. I pulled the title on the house, the 5-bedroom craftsman in the desirable neighborhood that I had been expelled from, and that's when I found the explosive device. There was a lien, a second mortgage taken out 4 years ago, predatory interest, dangerous terms. Where did that money go? I cross-referenced the dates with their social media. There it was, a vacation property in Lake Tahoe they claimed they were managing for a friend. They didn't, they bought it. They leveraged the family home to buy a weekend retreat for Ashley and her content creation, and they hadn't made a payment on the primary mortgage in 5 months. I stared at the document. Notice of default. They were 45 days away from foreclosure. They were living on a precipice, celebrating on the edge of a cliff, and demanding I pay the catering invoice while the ground crumbled beneath them. They weren't just cruel, they were insolvent. I leaned back in my chair. The old Jessica would have panicked. She would have liquidated her retirement account, begged for loans, and rushed in to rescue them. But the old Jessica was gone. The woman sitting in this chair had just sold her logistics optimization platform for $95 million 8 months ago, a fact they didn't know because they never asked about my little spreadsheet job. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney, Richard. It was 4 in the morning, but he answered on the first ring. "Jessica, is everything all right?" "I need to execute an acquisition," I said, my voice steady. "Immediately. First thing in the morning, I want to purchase a distressed mortgage portfolio, specifically a single residential note held by Pacific Northwest Bank." I gave him the address. Isn't that your parents' house?" Richard asked, hesitation creeping into his voice. "It is. They're in default. The bank is about to auction it. I want to buy the note before it hits the open market." "Jessica, if you do this, you become the creditor. You hold the lien. You effectively control the debt. I know you want to rescue them." "No," I said, looking at the photo of my trash-bagged belongings still open on my phone. "I want to establish a shell company, call it Cascade Holdings, keep my name completely off everything, purchase the debt, full cash offer. I want the deed in my possession by Friday. And then," I said, closing the spreadsheet, "we proceed with collection procedures." I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt efficient. They had spent 12 years treating me like a transaction. Now I was just finalizing the deal. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their creditor, and payment was overdue. By Friday, the paperwork was executed. Cascade Holdings was officially the holder of the mortgage note for 847 Maple Avenue. I held the power to foreclose, to evict, to demand full payment. But my parents didn't know that yet. To them, the silence from the bank was just another stroke of fortune they felt entitled to. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Martin. I let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speaker so I could continue organizing the few possessions I had retrieved from storage, the things they hadn't managed to discard yet. "Jessica, we have a situation," he said. No greeting, no apology for the celebration, just the tone of an executive summoning an assistant. "We need to have a family meeting immediately." "I'm occupied," I said, folding a sweater. "This isn't optional, it's an emergency. There's been a clerical error with the bank. They're threatening the house." A clerical error, that's what he called 5 months of missed payments and a secret second mortgage. "I can't help you with bank errors, Dad." "Don't be difficult, just come over. We need to strategize." Strategize meant find a way for Jessica to pay for it. I almost declined. I almost told him right then, but I realized that for the foreclosure to feel real to them, they needed to believe they had one last opportunity to manipulate me and watch it fail. I drove over 90 minutes later. The house looked exactly the same. The manicured lawn, the Lexus in the driveway, the facade of perfect suburban success. Inside, the tension was suffocating. My mother was pacing the living room, wringing her hands. Ashley was sitting on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, looking bored but annoyed that her weekend was being interrupted by financial stuff. Martin sat at the head of the dining table, surrounded by papers. He looked up when I walked in, his face a mask of serious concern. "Sit down, Jessica," he commanded. I remained standing. "What's going on?" "The bank is being unreasonable," he started, launching into a rehearsed speech. "They're claiming we're behind on the mortgage. It's obviously a mistake, some glitch in their system from when we refinanced for the renovations." Renovations? He meant the Lake Tahoe property. "They're threatening foreclosure proceedings if we don't bring the account current by Monday," he continued. "It's a misunderstanding, but we need liquidity to hold them off until our lawyers can resolve it." "How much liquidity?" I asked. $58,000. I didn't react. $58,000? "It's just a bridge loan, Jessica," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. "Just until everything gets sorted out. We know you have savings. You've always been so responsible with money." "And think about the family image," Ashley added, not looking up from her screen. "If people find out Dad is having financial problems, it could damage my reputation at the agency. I can't have that kind of scandal attached to my brand right now." "Your reputation?" I repeated. "That's the priority here?" "Of course it is," Martin snapped. "We all have reputations to maintain. Now, how quickly can you transfer the funds? I assume your 401k has enough equity to borrow against if your liquid assets are tied up." He had already calculated how I would pay. He had spent my retirement in his mind before I even entered the door. "I'm not liquidating my 401k, I said. "Then take out a personal loan," he demanded, his patience snapping. "You have excellent credit. We helped you build that credit. Use it." "No." The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Excuse me?" Martin stood up, his face reddening. "You ungrateful little—" "We raised you in this house. We gave you everything. And now, when we face a temporary setback, you're going to abandon us? You're going to let us lose our home because you want to hoard your little analyst salary?" "You're selfish, Jessica. You've always been selfish, sitting on your money while Mom is crying. Do you even care about this family?" "If you don't do this," my mother said, her voice turning icy, "don't bother coming back. We don't need a daughter who enjoys watching her parents suffer. You're either with us or you're cut off completely." They were threatening me with the very thing I wanted. They were trying to leverage a relationship that was already dead. "Is that your final offer? Pay up or get out?" "Yes," Martin hissed. $58,000 by Monday or you're dead to us." I looked at them, really looked at them. The entitlement, the cruelty, the absolute blindness to their own reality. "Okay," I said. "I'll see you on Monday." I turned and walked out. They shouted after me, calling me names, listing my failures, screaming that I would regret this. But I didn't regret it. I smiled all the way to the car, because they didn't know that on Monday I wasn't coming back as their daughter with a check. I was coming back as the owner with the deed. On Monday morning, I didn't go to work. I put on my best suit, a tailored navy blazer that cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment, and drove to 847 Maple Avenue. I parked my car not in the driveway, but on the street, leaving space for the moving trucks that would be arriving in 45 days. I walked up the path I had shoveled every winter for 20 years. I unlocked the key I wasn't supposed to have anymore. Inside, they were waiting. My mother was pacing again. Ashley was examining her phone. Martin sat at the head of the dining table, looking like a king waiting for tribute. When I walked in, relief washed over his face, quickly replaced with smug satisfaction. "You're late," he said, checking his watch. "I assume you have the check." I didn't answer. I walked past my mother, past Ashley, and stood at the opposite end of the table. I placed a thick leather portfolio on the polished wood. "Sit down," Martin commanded. "Let's get this over with so I can contact the bank." "I prefer to stand. And you're not contacting the bank, Martin. The bank doesn't own this house anymore." He froze. "What are you talking about? Did they sell the note?" "They did." "To who?" Panic edged into his voice. "Who holds the lien?" "Cascade Holdings." "Who the hell is Cascade Holdings?" Ashley asked, looking up from her phone. "Is that some vulture fund? Are they going to evict us?" "Cascade Holdings," I said, opening the portfolio, "is a private asset management firm specializing in distressed debt acquisition." I pulled out a single document, the deed to the property, stamped and notarized. I slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of my father. "And I am the sole proprietor of Cascade Holdings." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It extracted the oxygen from the room. My mother stopped pacing. Ashley's phone clattered to the floor. Martin stared at the document, his face draining of color, until he looked like death. "You," he whispered, "you bought the mortgage." "I bought the debt," I corrected. "I bought the arrears, the second mortgage you took out for the property, and the primary note. I own it all, which means, legally speaking, I am your landlord." "How?" my mother gasped. "Where did you get that kind of money? You're a supply chain analyst." "I was a supply chain analyst," I said, my voice calm, factual, lethal. "I started a logistics optimization platform 7 years ago. I sold it last year to an international shipping conglomerate." I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence settle on them like a tombstone. "I accepted a buyout of $95 million. Martin made a sound like he had been struck. He slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide, staring at me as if I were a stranger. And in a way, I was. The daughter he knew, the doormat, the ATM, the invisible girl, was gone. $95 million, Ashley squeaked. "You have $95 million? "Yes, and you have 45 days. I pulled out the second document, the notice to vacate. "What?" Martin sputtered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "You can't do this. We're your family. This is our home." "This is my home," I said. "My name is on the deed. My money paid for the structure you're sitting in, and frankly, you're terrible tenants. You haven't paid rent in 5 months. You've neglected maintenance, and you've been hostile to the owner." "Jessica, please," my mother pleaded, tears finally spilling over. "We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street." "I'm not throwing you out on the street. I'm initiating foreclosure proceedings on a defaulted asset. It's just business, Mom. Isn't that what you always told me? It's just business." I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't powerful. They weren't the sophisticated professionals or the influencers they pretended to be. They were just 3 people who had spent their lives buying things they couldn't afford to impress people they didn't like, using money they stole from their own daughter. "You have 45 days to vacate the premises," I said.
If you are not out by noon on the 45th day, the sheriff will remove you. I suggest you start packing. You can use the boxes you packed my belongings with. I left them in the garage. I turned to leave. Wait, Martin shouted, standing up. We can fix this. We can work something out. You're rich, Jessica. You have $95 million. Why are you doing this over 58 grand? I stopped at the door and looked back. Because it was never about the money, Dad. It was about the fact that you were willing to erase me for an art studio. You were willing to delete me. So now I'm returning the favor. I tossed my set of keys onto the entryway table. They landed with a heavy clatter. I'll see you in court if necessary, but I wouldn't recommend it. My attorneys are significantly better than yours. I walked out the front door and down the path. I didn't look back at the house. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. Behind me, the house stood silent and imposing, a monument to their ego, but in the rearview mirror, it just looked small. 4 weeks later, the sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean, painting the sky in hues of coral and gold that I had only ever seen in photographs. I stood on the balcony of my new home in Charleston, South Carolina, holding a mug of coffee that tasted like liberation. The air was warm, smelling of salt and magnolia, a stark contrast to the stifling, artificial scent of my parents' house. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't a secret millionaire living in a modest apartment to avoid attention. I had bought this house, a stunning contemporary design overlooking the harbor, under my own name. No shell companies, no aliases, just Jessica. My phone was on the table inside, powered off. I knew what was happening back in Portland. The movers had come yesterday. My parents were currently unpacking their diminished lives into a 3-bedroom townhouse on the outskirts of town. It was a decent townhouse, I know, because I own that complex too. I had allowed them to rent it at market rate, a final act of mercy they probably interpreted as an insult. They were furious, humiliated, and, for the first time in their lives, accountable. Moving here wasn't running away. It was an act of sovereignty. For years, I thought that staying and enduring their abuse was strength. I thought that if I paid enough, tolerated enough, and minimized myself enough, I could earn my place. But standing here watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized the truth. You cannot earn love from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and you cannot find peace in a battlefield, no matter how much armor you wear. Moving wasn't a retreat, it was a relocation of assets. I was moving my most valuable resource, myself, to an environment where I could thrive. It was the ultimate optimization strategy. I had eliminated the inefficiency and reallocated for sustainability. I thought about Martin and Linda. They were probably telling their friends a story about how their ungrateful daughter stole their home. They were probably crafting a narrative where they were the victims. Let them. Their opinion of me was none of my business. They had chased status their entire lives, buying things they couldn't afford to impress people they didn't care, and in the end it left them with nothing. They had spent decades building a facade, a hollow shell of wealth and perfection. I had spent that same time building something real, skills, resilience, a fortune. They had the appearance of power, I had the substance of it, and when the crash came, the facade shattered, but the substance held firm. It was the ultimate lesson in value versus cost. They knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. I finished my coffee and walked down the private stairs to the beach. The sand was cool under my feet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't feel heavy with expectation. I wasn't just retiring, I was starting over. I had already begun paperwork for a new foundation, the Foundation for Financial Autonomy. Its mission was simple: to provide financial literacy, legal support, and emergency grants to family members who are being financially exploited. I wanted to help other system administrators find their exit strategy. I wanted to transform my pain into a platform for someone else. I walked toward the water, the ocean stretching out before me, vast and open. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't check my phone. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't waiting for a message, a demand, or a crisis. I was just here, present, whole. The invisible girl was gone. The woman walking on the beach was seen, powerful, and finally, undeniably free. If you believe that respect should be the currency of family, not money, hit that like button and share the story. And tell me in the comments, would you have evicted them or let them stay?